Joining us now by phone live in Cairo is NBC News correspondent Ron Allen. Ron, thank you very much for staying up with us into the wee hours tonight. Really appreciate it.
Sure. How are you?
Good, thank you. What are you able to tell us, Ron, about the sustainability of the protests at this point? Do things seem to be waxing or waning heading into Friday morning in Cairo?
I think sustainability is a good way to put it, Rachel. There's a lot being said here about how long can this go on? How long can ordinary people muster the courage, energy, enthusiasm to go out into the square, to go out into the streets of other parts of other cities across the country and protest? Banks have been closed here. Schools have been closed. When you drive beyond Cairo, you see factories that are not working. You don't see any commerce on the highways, no buses and trucks. So the country, for all intents and purposes, has essentially ground to a halt. And that big statement means that a lot of individual lives are being affected. On the one hand, you have protesters out there doing this, but people have to live. And this is, I think, part of the government's strategy is to divide and just wear down the opposition and wear down this country till the point where people just cannot go out there and do this anymore and feel that they're risking too much to continue this fight.
Ron, I know that you returned to Cairo from Alexandria today. We've been showing some images of what the protests look like in Alexandria. What can you tell us about the mood outside of Cairo and outside of the cities? Do the anti-Mubarak protesters seem to have support around the whole country?
Certainly, yeah, there is support. Everybody has a horror story to tell about the regime one way or another. In Alexandria, for example, a lot of people are rallying around the struggle, the fight of a family of a 28-year-old man who was killed by police, a blogger who had posted information about the police in his community, alleging them with corruption, drug dealing, that sort of thing. He was beaten and killed in custody and as an act of revenge. And that's one of the small things that has happened that's rallying people in individual communities. But again, I think this gets back to the question of sustainability. Can people continue to go out and do this in the streets? And I think they have every intention of doing it. There's, in terms of waxing or waning, I think it's up and down, but the momentum, I think, is certainly there with the opposition, because despite the concessions that the government has made, despite the tanks and troops firing in the square today, people are still out there laying their lives on the line. And tomorrow, Friday, this so-called day of departure, certainly a very always the most sacred day in the Muslim world, another huge rally. And I have every expectation that there will be a lot of people and a lot of squares in a lot of places, not just in Cairo, Alexandria, Suez, Luxor, and I expect it to be a big, big day, a day of decision perhaps.
Ron, I am on purpose not talking about specifically where you are, and if you noticed, all of the other networks right now tonight, they're still covering this, are not talking about the explicit location of anybody who is reporting from Egypt. There's been a lot of restriction in terms of live camera shots. A lot of people, as you are joining us by phone, it's because it is very dangerous right now to be doing what you're doing, to be reporting from Egypt. What do you expect in terms of the ability of Western media and even pan-Arab media to be able to cover what happens with what's expected to be that very large demonstration tomorrow?
Well, it is very dangerous, Rachel, and one of the things that's happened today is that live pictures of the square have been eliminated, so it's hard to see what's actually happening. And a lot of us have pulled back to positions in the country and around the city where we can essentially report to you and others around the world what's happening. As a journalist in an environment like this, you have to sort of strike a balance between getting as close as you can and being in a position where you can survive and being in a position where you are free to tell the world. A lot of equipment has been impounded. A lot of people have been harassed individually, beaten up, and so forth. That has not happened to me individually. But our strategy has been to try and be in a position where we can observe, report, talk to people about what's going on, and stay here, because it's not an easy thing to do in covering civil conflict around the world. These are always very difficult questions that journalists face. But again, the bottom line is you have to stick your nose in it to really understand what's going on and to really talk to the people who are involved and to really see it. Because as you were saying in your open, there's a lot of propaganda, and journalists are always tools of both sides. Here, yes, it seems that it is the government that's really cracking down on us. Every time that we've encountered a lot of hostility, personally, I'm saying now, it's been pro-government forces who feel that we are not telling their side of the story. And the bottom line is that the government is the military, the government is the police, the government is the army, and those are the people who ultimately have the capability to squash this thing and to squash us at any moment if they choose to. So yes, we're being very careful. We're keeping our heads down. But ultimately, this story is not about us. It's about ordinary people who you meet, mothers, fathers, workers on the streets who just want a better life. And so many of them always say, we want a better life for our children. And so many people have told me that they're willing to sacrifice their lives for the future.
NBC News correspondent Ron Allen live in Cairo tonight. And as he says, staying there. Ron, thank you. Stay safe. Really appreciate your time.
Sure.
I will just tell you personally that I'm so plugged into the way that news is getting out of Cairo and Egypt. Our whole staff and the way that we're covering this is different than the way we usually cover everything because of the restrictions on information getting both into and out of Egypt. That as Ron is giving us first-person confirmation of the way he has been harassed as a journalist in Cairo and by whom, I'm having this instinct, even though I'm live on camera talking to you, like, excuse me for a second, I actually have to tweet that. Because that's the means by which people are getting this information out there in small tech ways, even as we're broadcasting nationally right now. I will also say I need to beg pardon for a moment of earnestness. In this critical moment for the world, journalists from all over the news media are doing their finest work. It's urgent, it's brave, it's responsible, it's important. Doesn't mean, though, that there aren't some folks who are completely embarrassing themselves. We have a very important reminder coming up about responsibility versus the alternative. And yes, we have tape. We also have the interview tonight with former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. It's all ahead. Please stay tuned.